All right, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about React Router DOM. Now, with React Router DOM, that's going to give us the ability to actually make a single page application that's going to have routing capabilities, meaning it's going to be able to interact with the URL pattern, and it's going to be able to change the component that is actually showing on the page. So, for example, if we come over to our great Poke API, which we love to demonstrate and take a look at, and we go over to docs. So I go over to checkout docs. They have, and I get rid of this little pop-up here. This Poke API slash docs. Once that slash is happening, the application that's rendering on the screen is still the same one. There's not necessarily a brand new template that's being generated or something that's triggering a re-render per se. When I travel to this site or to this URL pattern, the only thing that changes is, oh wow, there's a lot of ads going on this site now. The only thing that changes is the component that's actually rendering on the app. The app itself is still rendering, but the component that's being rendered is what changes. A little bit hard to wrap our heads around if we think about it this way, but essentially what we're saying is we have our application, and let me go ahead and place that up top. And usually, or up to this point, what we've seen is where we write all of our return statements here inside of our application. That's exactly where all of our code is going to go. Well, now what we're doing is we're going to create a component or a directory named pages that is going to hold different pages that will render inside of our application, such as maybe home.jsx. We may have something like about, maybe even a contact us page. I usually like to name mine in the naming convention of home page.jsx or about page.jsx. Essentially, I want to make sure that these different pages are able to render on my application. Well, the goal here is for my app to be able to run a ternary statement. My app should be able to say, hey, I want to check the URL pattern and say if URL pattern, or if we want to utilize a switch case or whatever, and say if URL is equal to a slash, then I want to return homepage.jsx. Elif URL is equal to about, then I would like to return about page.jsx. And then finally, a separate elif saying if URL pattern is equal to contact, then I want to return contact page.jsx. Now, this is likely something that we could write in code, but as we know, React is going to get more and more complicated as we dive into it. We may need functionality to be passed down. We may need different use states to be passed into these components, and we need a way to control the logic flow as efficiently as possible. And that's what React Router DOM is going to do for us. It's going to give us the ability to control this logic and be able to pass different parameters to pages as needed from the app. So we'll have our pages, we'll have our application, and then depending on the URL pattern, we're going to create an outlet and I'm actually going to use a different shape for this one. Yeah, let's do that. And what this outlet is going to do is it's going to connect our application with our pages. All right. Does anyone have any questions about this so far? Okay, great. So this is the end state. This is where we want to actually end up. Let's go into actually writing some code to make sure this is what happens. Currently, I'm inside of my project here in React Router, in my directory for React Router. You can see that I don't have any other dependencies that have been installed other than Vite and React. So let's go ahead and get started with our React Router DOM. First thing I'm going to do is install the dependency. I'm going to say npm install React Router DOM. All right, so there's the dependency now. I have the React Router DOM that has been installed. And I could actually utilize it throughout my project now. Great. I'm going to change directory into source. And here I'm going to create a directory named pages, just like we discussed before. I'll then dive into pages and I'll create the different pages that I want to work with. In this case, let's go ahead and just start with homepage. All right, so the homepage has been created. I can go to homepage JSX and I can say, all right, well, I want homepage to be a function that will return a fragmentation tag with an h1 element that says home page and a p tag with some lorem ipsum. And then I just wanted to export default homepage. All right, so there's the entire homepage. Again, this lives inside of the pages directory. Now, if you really think about it, this is just a component. So I could just go to app.jsx and write this ternary statement just like I wrote it out here. Check the URL pattern, interact with it, save it inside of a use state, utilize a bunch of use reps, but it's not exactly going to be as efficient as I need it to be. And it may control some misbehavior as I'm switching in between pages. So instead, I'm going to utilize React Router DOM to be able to connect my pages here. So I'm going to go ahead and take this all off here. And I'm going to add a simple h1 tag saying this is the app. If I take a look at my project now, you'll see this is the app being presented on the screen. Let me actually take off all this formatted CSS that we don't actually want nor need. There you go. So now we see this is the app being rendered on the screen. Well, now it's as simple as connecting the dots. I want homepage to be connected to this is the app. Well, let's go ahead and start off by creating our actual router concept here. So I'm going to change directory 1 back into source. Here's where main JSX is going to be appearing. So this is where I want to actually create the router. So I'm going to touch router.jsx. You'll see that file was created. Whoa, there you go. In here, I'm going to import this create browser router from React Router DOM. I'm going to import then the two things that I want to render. One of them being the app, and the other being the home page. This is where I want to connect them. We're not going to worry about the home page just yet. We're going to concentrate on creating a browser router for the app, just the app alone. All right, so I'm going to create this router, and I'm going to utilize it doing this create browser router. Now, this create browser router is going to take a couple of parameters here. One of them being the path. I want the application to render at index. All right, every time the application follows localhost 5173, write that in there. At slash, we want to make sure that the application renders. And I'm going to specify that by saying this is the component to render as parent. By specifying the element of app. We'll stop there. All right. So it's going to create a browser router. There's a couple of different routers that we can create. There's the browser router, and then there's the hash router. We'll talk about the differences later on in the lesson, but just keep that in the back of your mind for the time being. All right. So now I have this app that's being able to render, and I created this router to be able to render the application. We're not worrying about homepage just yet. We don't need anything in package.json, app router, and I have app.jsx. Well, as of right now, if I think back to the very first lesson when we got in React, when everything connects to one another, the way this works is we have a request from index.js, or excuse me, .index.html. What is it that index.html utilizes to render the application on the screen? Does anyone remember?
Talking about app.jsx.
Well, app.jsx will eventually render inside of index.html, right? But how does that happen? Let's take a look at index.html. What inside of index.html gets called that eventually
Main.
renders the application on the screen?
Main.
Yeah. So we know that inside of index.js HTML, the script of main.jsx gets called. And if we take a look at main.jsx, I'm going to take off the strict mode here. Nope. If we take a look at main.jsx, main.jsx grabs the division of root and it renders the app. So that's what actually inserts the application into React. Right? So now we get app.jsx being rendered. So we'll just go ahead and label this before React router DOM. So this is what it looks like before React router DOM. But now when I created the router is telling me that it's going to render the element of app. So there's a little bit of a conflict here, right? Because main.jsx is already rendering the app, but router is also working as far as rendering the app itself. So where would the connecting file be? Would I go inside of index.html and change the script as far as which one it's supposed to reference in order to render something? Or where would I make the change as to how information is to be rendered inside of index.html?
Would you import router JSX into main and then call it from there?
Awesome. Yeah, the change would happen within the router. Right? I would go into my main JSX, import router, which I did not export, of course. All right, let me give that another shot here. There it is. All right, so now we have our router from router JSX, and I want to make sure that's what gets rendered into my application. Now, as of now, we're just rendering the app. And one would think, oh, well, then all I need to do is pass in the router. But actually, we need to grab a separate element from React Router DOM. This one is called router provider. And that component takes in one prop named router, which is what we also just created. So now instead of app, we'll go ahead and pass in the router provider, where the prop of router will be equal to the router we created. So now instead of having this before and after, or instead of our DOM just rendering the way it did, app.jsx no longer connects directly to main.jsx. Main.jsx connects directly to the router. And within the router, we have app.jsx as the application. And then, depending on the URL pattern, we will render one of many elements. All right. Well, now if we take a look at our application, my development server is still running. And notably, nothing has changed. If I take a look at it, nothing has changed as far as the way it's being rendered. That's a good thing. That's what we want. I could completely remove app from this main.jsx file, refresh my browser, and everything's still rendering exactly the same. So as of now, the functionality of as to how everything is being rendered, we just essentially added an extra layer to how information is being sent or being injected into index.html. Well, what about a homepage? How do I connect the homepage under this is the app? Inside of router, again, like we said in our drawing here above, there's going to be a ternary statement that says if URL pattern matches a specific pattern, then I want you to render one of these pages. And I want to do this utilizing the outlet. Well, what I can add here is add children, which represent pages of the application. I add the children key, which is going to take in an array of objects. And because as of now, we're just talking about a homepage, we can say we want the homepage to render. Again, I want to pass an element saying this is the element that I want to have. Oh, forgot to add that object there. And the element that I want to have will be homepage JSX. There you go. So homepage is now rendering or should be rendering. Now, at what path do I want homepage to be shown? Do I want
Is
to
it just
do,
backslash homepage?
yeah, so you're saying that we want to add a backslash homepage, something like this, maybe, and
Yes.
add it down below here, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's definitely a good approach. We could do something like that. But if I take the Poke API as an example, the Poke API doesn't have a backslash home. And most places that I would go visit wouldn't have a backslash home. They would just render the home page upon me also reaching the index, right? And if we take a look at our drawing, here we ask if the URL pattern is equal to the index. So I want to make sure that this is still 5173, otherwise known as that index. We do that by passing in the parameter index is true. Now, by saying index is true, it will render the homepage element upon localhost 5173. Let's take a look at how that information is being rendered on our screen now. I come over, now refresh the page, but nothing's rendering yet. All I'm seeing is this is the app. And I could even inspect it to try to see if there's any mistakes. I have some user messages, but nothing that tells me that I've messed up any code. Well, let's take a look at this drawing. What am I missing here?
You're not calling it.
Okay, can you dive a little bit deeper into that?
Right now, you're just rendering the app. You haven't actually done anything to change it to homepage.
All right. So I'm just rendering the app. I'm not doing anything to change it to homepage. So let me take a look at the app.jsx. So we have this ternary statement that we talked about, but it's not being activated here, right? So let's see. I have an app. I have a pages directory, and I created the homepage.jsx. What in this top drawing here hasn't been generated yet, other than the remaining pages?
Well, I do have a question.
Outlet?
Okay, that was my question. The outlet and router, are those the same, or is router more of the app?
Got it. Yes. So the outlet and the router are not the same. The
Okay,
outlet is a component that works within the router to connect the application to the children, but it's not going to be anything that interacts with the router itself is what gives us the entire ability to create an outlet. Does that
so,
make sense, Morty?
close. So app on your drawing, is that the same as app.gsx or some?
Yes,
But I'm seeing the ternary statement in router, not app, right?
that's correct.
But in your drawing, the ternary statement is an app, not router.
Yeah, so let me dive into it and let me try to demonstrate it. And then afterwards, if you still have the question, we'll revisit it.
Oh,
That
okay.
way, that way I think we could clarify it once we see it. All right. So like we identified, the outlet is what's missing. So we're going to go ahead and bring in outlet from React Router DOM. And all we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, there is an outlet here, an outlet component that is going to be rendered. Well, what did that do? If I go into my Veep project now I have a homepage. And let me refresh it just so that everyone can see that there's no errors. So there's no errors being rendered. I have a homepage with lorem ipsum happening. All right. So I guess that would be a good point, Morty, that you brought up as far as where that ternary statement is located. because that ternary statement would likely not be located necessarily within the app, but rather within the outlet. All right. So now what happens is the application renders. I'm just going to take off that use state because we don't need it. The application renders, index HTML gets inserted into my browser. All right. After index HTML gets inserted, it comes over and takes a look at main.jsx. Well, main.jsx is telling me, hey, we have a router provider, and the router is located here. So now we take a look at the router. Inside of the router, we know that the element that we're going to be rendering as the parent for the entire application will be app.jsx. So app.jsx renders. Inside of app.jsx, and let me just go ahead and make a copy of that. We want to have children. And what the children of app will look like, in this case, in index, I want you to render the homepage. What connects the children or the pages or this entire ternary statement here that you're writing in the router to app.jsx is the fact that you add this outlet component. Without the outlet component, there is no connection to the children. With the outlet component, there's connection to the children. Did that address your question, Morty?
Yes, thanks.
Of course. All right. Does anyone else have any questions about this?
Is this the only place that we have outlet? Like, conceptually, I understand what outlet is doing, but I'm not, I guess, understand like what it's doing under the hood. Because it seems like this is the only place we put outlet at. So, like, how does it know what to grab from that?
Got it. So the outlet, let me pull this up side by side here. Adding it. Where's my app? There's my app. All right, so the application renders, right? After the application renders, immediately it starts here. It goes through main.jsx and then injects the router. So when it injects the router, the first element that renders is app. And we see that happening here. If I comment out this outlet portion, the app renders just as normal. But if we want children to exist or the children component to actually be rendered on the screen, we have to add the outlet. So what exactly is happening there? Well, like we said, it starts the flow here, and then it renders the application. When it's rendering the application, it starts the script here, moving down all the way to the return statement. And then it says, oh, wait a minute, there's an outlet. And that outlet tells it to break out of here and take a look at the children. It dives then into homepage. And that's what gets homepage to also render on the screen. Did that answer your question, Jack?
Yes, it did.
Where's the ternary statement you're referring to? I don't actually see a ternary statement anywhere.
The ternary statement's actually happening under the hood.
Okay, that was a confusion.
Of course.
This seems like use state with a whole bunch of extra steps. What's the benefit of doing it this way as opposed to just passing components into use states and then switching based on a conditional?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes down to the benefits of utilizing something like React Browser Router, we're really going to see the benefits once we start going into having something like multiple. One, there's passing parameters within the URL. If we take a look at something like, what can I think of here? I don't think I could pull up Netflix. All right, let me pull up an example here that wouldn't necessarily be bad to go.
I guess if your site is extremely complex with a whole bunch of pages, then you'd have to import so many props, it would be absurd.
All right, so if we take a look at something like this, all right. So here we have Crunchyroll and it has the Dr. Stone show, right? So what we're seeing up above, we see series, but then we see this code here, this GY, whatever that code is, and then a following of Dr. Stone. This code here is actually a parameter that is going to be sent to the server to grab the information of this specific series. We're going to see that later on. But that portion there of being able to pass parameters through the URL pattern, that's going to come really in handy when it comes to React Router DOM. And it's not something that we can do simply when we're creating useState functions, along with something called loader functions. So loaders is something that will allow us to render a component once information has come back from the server and not prior to. And that's also something else that we can, it's doable with writing just plain JavaScript, but you would have to do a couple of extra steps and a couple of different use state hooks to be able to get the behavior to work correctly. So it's just a tool to, rather than having to write it manually all by hand, it's giving you access to tools so that you can make it more efficient and develop quicker. Does that answer your question, Tim?
It does, thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
Could you quickly make another page as an example so you have multiple options within your router?
Absolutely. That's going to be in part 2 of our lecture, but
Okay.
I think we made pretty good progress. So let's go ahead and add it in there now. Let me go back here, go into pages, and let's go ahead and make a new one. Let's just say we make the contact page here. So in contact page, same thing. I'm going to add a const. And I want to return a fragmentation tag that will have an H1 saying contact us. And let's just do a UL with 3 li items. And let's just do phone. All right. Let me go ahead and export default this page here. All right, so this page is going to be another child of the app. So where would I want to import that page?
Inside the router, right?
Yeah. So now I go over to the router and I import contact page. Nice. Now it goes into the ternary statement portion. It's going to be rendering within the application, just like we see here in this drawing on the right-hand side. Right here are my pages. I want it to fall into that ternary statement and render within the application. So I know it's going to be one of the children components. So here I can add a separate child. And I can actually add a path. And now for this one, what I want the path to be will be contact. What that will look like here is something along the following lines. Then I can just specify the element. And the element that I want to render will be the contact page. All right. Let's make sure we have no errors here. I refresh my site. Just my 2 user messages. Everything's rendering the way I want it to. If I come over to my URL pattern and I add contact, you can see that it still shows me the application. It's following the URL pattern as we wanted it to. We'll be covering how to add a nav bar in part 2 of our lecture. So please, I'm tracking that was triggering a re-render. Once we have a nav bar, there won't be a re-render. It's just going to switch between the application. Then we have our contact us with the 3 different UL items. All right. Any questions regarding React Router DOM up to this point?
Line 16 in router.jsx, for the index on colon true. I guess I don't really understand that.
Line 16.
In router.jsx index true.
Got it. So index true. The index is in reference to this slash at the very end. What I'm essentially saying is that as soon as the application renders is, well, which child is it that I wanted to render inside of it along with the application? Because I don't want it to just say, this is the app, right? I want a homepage to be displayed. So because I want a homepage to be displayed, I add index, and by adding index, it adopts the parent's URL pattern. So it's saying at the same time that the parent is supposed to render, also render this component. So app and homepage will render at the same time.
Okay, so when it comes to future pages, you only need the index for the home page essentially.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Doesn't seem like there are any other questions. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording here. All right, welcome back, everyone. So now we have a couple of pages here. As of now, we have 2 pages that are connected to our application. We just want to go ahead and create a third one, and this last one will just be an about page. I would like you guys to walk me through creating this page and actually connecting it to my router. How would I go about doing that? Could you say that one more
Somebody,
time again?
yeah,
I was just telling him he's not muted.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Well, I might as well go.
All right.
I would say first thing is you would have to go to your pages directory
All right. Currently in there.
and you would create
I would create what?
a page name contact dot ASX.
All right. I think we have the contact page, so I'm just gonna make this one the about page, JSX.
Oh yeah. And with that you would include the function about page, export default, about page.
All right. Let me go ahead and just put something in here so that we have something that will
Mm.
show.
And
All right. So now we have the about page.
the way you would execute this file is that on the router page, you would add a new child to children, and it would be path / about page / Oh wait, we have to go all the way up. We have to import the actual about page.
All right, let's go ahead and do that.
Mhm. Okay, now that's imported, now we would add elements. I forgot what you actually call this when you put the two.
The arrow brackets.
Self-closing.
No, what would you even call this when it turns green?
Isn't it just like a component basically is what you're doing?
Oh
Yeah.
yes, there we go. Yeah, you called it the component about
Still need
page.
to fix the import line.
All right. So now let's go ahead and check
I
that
guess
out.
good, never mind.
And now if we take a look here, our about page is actually able to render. Okay, great. Now, as of right now, the way we're switching between pages is by actually manipulating the URL. And every time we do that and press enter, we're resetting the state of our project, which isn't necessarily what I want. Instead, I want the state of my project to stay the same. Now, let's take a look at what I mean by that. Let's go ahead and create a state variable here. We'll just count, set count. Which is equal to a use state. And let's do 1. And I'm just going to include count in here. Add a button. That on click will increase the count to count plus 1. All right, so there we can see that it's happening. We're changing the count, but when I go back to a different page, such as contact, and I send the request, it goes back to the number 1. That is because every time I manipulate the URL, it's triggering an entire new request, grabbing index HTML, and re-rendering my entire application. So I want to have a way to manipulate, to be able to go in between pages. And I'm going to do that by creating a navbar component. So I'm going to change directories here, going back. I'm going to make a directory named components. Inside of components, I'll make a navbar. We can even make this a little bit fancy. Let's go ahead and take a navbar from Bootstrap. I'm going to go ahead and take this getting started document. Install React Bootstrap. While that's being installed, I'm going to need this here to be inside of main.jsx. Right? So now I should have my React Bootstrap installed. Everything should be working. If I go over to V, things are going to look a little different. All right, they do. That's because Bootstrap is now working as my main styling sheet. And I could just go over to components. Let me take a nav bar from here. I'll just take this very first one. So I go over to nav. And instead of basic example, I'm going to call this navbar. All right. Now I'm going to bring in this component within the app and call it navbar. If I go over to Vite, I now have this navbar that's also included with a link to home, link, and a drop-down menu. Let's go ahead and alter this nav bar here. I know I'm not going to need the nav drop down, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And we do have a home. The href should be /. We have a contact page. And this should be going to contact. And then we have a about page. All right. So there's my nav bar. Let me go ahead and refresh my site. Well, if I go back home, home is happening. I click on plus. Okay, I see the numbers changing up above. Let me go ahead and go to the contact page. We'll still change to 1. Why is that happening?
Because it's still forcing a refresh, like a re-render, and that element up there is basically a static page.
Yeah, exactly. So we're still essentially triggering a re-render. We're still asking for a new request because this nav.link, if we take a look at the code here and we inspect it, this nav.link is actually just an anchor tag. An anchor tag that doesn't know how to behave with React Router DOM. All right, well, let's tell it how to behave. React Router DOM actually comes with a function or a class. Actually, it's a component named link. You can see here we can import link from React Router DOM. And by doing so, I can go over to all of my links here and pass in an as attribute. So I want these links to behave as links from React Router DOM. And now, because I did that, I continue to click on plus signs here. I see that there's app 11. When I click on home, it stayed as app 11. Go back to my contact page here, which isn't working for some reason. Interesting. Oh, I know why it's not working. I need to change these attributes here of hrefs to 2. I apologize. That's just from the fact that we have a link. There you go. So now I go to contact page. It sends me to contact page. I go to about. It sends me to about page. Everything is working the way we needed it to. Now, what's unique about this navbar link? Let me go ahead and I'm going to demonstrate it without all of the bootstrap first, and then we'll break it down again. So we have a UL with 3 li items. I'm going to add some quick styling here. So we have home, about, and contact. Again, we could just turn these all into anchor tags. Right? You can say all of these will be anchor tags. And I want all of them to have an href. One to home, one to about, and one to contact. Well, in doing so, that takes away my state. It's triggering a re-render. That's a problem. I don't want it to do that because it's resetting my entire application. Instead, I want to use link from React Router DOM. Now, in order to utilize link, all I have to do is switch out all of these anchor tags. Oh, that's not gonna like it. Interesting. For link tags, and then I just need to switch out all of the attributes of href to 2 tags or 2 attributes. Now I can do all my plus sign, go to home, about, contact, and you'll see that it remains the same. It is no longer triggering a re-render. And if we look at what's happening under the hood, it is still being translated to an anchor tag. The only difference is that because we passed it into the link component, the link is essentially overriding the default behavior of the anchor tag and telling it, hey, instead of making an entire request, let me take over. I know how to handle this information and render the correct component on the screen. All right. Now this is the one I made here. I just want to have a nice little neat navbar bootstrap or bootstrap navbar. So I copied one from Bootstrap. And in order to have it work properly, I have to add an as attribute where I tell it to behave like the link from React Router DOM. And I still make sure that there is a to attribute so that it knows where exactly it's going. Contact or about. All right. Does anyone have any questions regarding the nav bars?
So is the point of the as, is it because you're trying to use the link within another component?
The point of the as is specifically to React Bootstrap. So React Bootstrap has these components of nav.link, but they know that they don't necessarily follow the behavior that you may want it to. So it gives you the option to pass an as attribute where you can tell it how to behave. So all of the styling that belongs to nav.link will still be rendered, but this as attribute is to change the behavior as to how the link is going to behave itself.
Mm.
Does that answer your question?
It's still a little bit fuzzy, but it makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
So where would you look up the as to syntax? Would it be in the Bootstrap or documentation as far as how to do that?
Yes, it is in the Bootstrap documentation. If you come down below, there is a level of different attributes you can pass in here. And here's the as
Okay.
attribute. All right. Okay, so now we covered how to be able to traverse or change the component that's actually being rendered. We're able to move through the different pages inside of our project effectively, and we're able to maintain our state. Awesome. Now, what's going to happen if there's some sort of error boundary, right? I want to make sure that my user, if they go to something that doesn't exist, so for example, we go to Poke API here. Currently, I'm in pokei.co, and I go and type in home, and I send it. Well, the Poke API still renders, but it tells me, hey, this page doesn't exist. There's a 404 not found error. How do we handle something like that? Oh, stuff is, we go again into our source directory, into our pages. We're going to make a new page. This one is going to be called the notfound.jsx. I'm actually going to call it not found page. Here I'm going to go ahead and create the function. what I'm going to do is I'm going to return an H1 tag saying page not found. I could even add a 404 if we really wanted to. So 404 page not found. Say, please reach out if you are sure this page should be rendering. All right, so there's my page not found. Now the question is, when and where should this page exist and actually render inside of my router? Well, if I come over to my router, I can see that I have all my children and I have specific paths set for specific elements. Now there's a difference between an error page and a not found page. So the way we're going to handle a not found page is we're going to pass a different child where the element that we're going to render will be not found. All right, so now I'm rendering my not found page. Well, how do I make some actual functionality for it? Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to say not found for anything not matching previous patterns. Well, there's no way for me to actually write that, right? There's no way for me to just put this as an argument inside of the URL pattern. So instead, what we do is we put path and we say for any path that has not been specified before, anything else, this is more of like a catch-all, etc., that we can utilize to just then render the not found page. So let's go over to our project. I can go to about, home, contact, about, nothing's broken. But the moment I type in something like a bunch of gibberish and I try to send a request, well, the application renders. It says this is an index. This doesn't match the contact. It doesn't match the about page. So this must be my catch. And it renders my not found page. Does anyone have any questions over how to create the not found page and integrate it into your site?
Is there a more concise way of importing all these different pages, or do you have to do it for each one in the router?
I would say do it this way to have it specifically a more concise way of,
Yeah, like wouldn't that page get just like gigantic if you have a bunch of pages like that file?
Yes, I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
I mean, I think to me it makes sense to have it all on the router page versus the app.jsx page.
Right. There's a way, I've seen it before, and I apologize for not knowing it off the top of my head, but there is a way where you can create a for loop, and essentially by the end of mapping through the different pages, you would just pass in the argument saying where the element is homepage, and then in the path, it would say exactly where to import it as well. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I do know that there is a shorthand for importing all of these pages. I apologize for not knowing it off the top of my head, Tim.
Yeah, all good.
All right. Any other questions?
What's a good example of making a different parent component to render, as in you have the app as a parent right now. When would you have another parent with different children on the same overall project?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see. How could I do, where have I seen something like that? You know, GitHub doesn't have one of those. The way that I could, the only example that I could think of from the top of my head, would be something along the lines of this. All right. I have my portfolio, and my portfolio has been created as an application. So great. There's my app, and it's my portfolio. And inside of my portfolio, I do have the children, which are connected through the router. Well, in these children, maybe I have something like the Rick and Morty API that we'll be working with. So I can say Rick and Morty. Then there's also the Pokemon API, or the Pokemon cards, Pokemon Dream Team. And then maybe there's a third one here, something like a to-do list, all running on React. Now, when you first create all three of these projects, they don't look exactly like this. Instead, a good example would be where the Rick and Morty API is the entire, or the Rick and Morty exercise is the entire app. And inside of this app, you had children with different pages. We'll just say many pages. All right. Well, now, instead of having the Rick and Morty at the parent level or making it the app, I want it to be a child of the entire application, because this is my portfolio and I want to display all of these different things, right? All these different projects that I have. Well, I could do something like follows. I could say, hey, I want to have a path that leads to, and then for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to say Pokemon here. Oh, that will not work. And in this path, I wanted to render the Pokemon project. This Pokemon project may have something like children still inside of it. And we could still set it to an array. And there we could have, again, our home page. So we could say, hey, at index, I want this to still be true. And this could show the element of select a Pokemon. Or we could name it Pokemon homepage. And then we got something like Pokédex. I'm not going to actually code this entire project out because that would be a little intense. Pokédex page, and so on. All right, so this way, when someone goes to my portfolio, they can go to see my Pokemon project at HTTP, whatever your portfolio site's name is, /Pokemon. That would render the entire Pokemon project. They will still have access to all of the other projects that I have available, and the state would be maintained between all those separate projects. Did that answer your question, Noah?
Yeah, so you really only have one app parent which contains children which are technically able to have separate functionality. So just one main app per
Right.
router.
One main app per router, but all the children can have their own sub-children as well.
Thank you.
Of course. Let me comment all that out because that is going to throw an error. All right. Any other questions? Okay, great. With that said, I currently covered my not found page, which is different than my error page. But what about an error page? What if I wanted that to be a thing? I'm actually gonna take that out for now, just that. And I'm gonna bring it down here so that everyone can see that still as an example. All right. Well, in order to add an error element that is not the same as a child, if we go over to the Poke API and we actively try to break it, I wonder if there is a way to break it. Let's see. Hmm. I need to find a site that I could break. That way I could show it to all of us. But if I could find something that we could break, we don't want the user or whoever to just get a massive error message saying, hey, your React Bootstrap code crashed, right? And it's not rendering on the screen. Instead, we want to give them some sort of message like, hey, we made a mistake. Please contact us and let us know about this issue so that we can document it and fix it.
You could intentionally break one of your own pages, so if that component were to render, it would just pop out an error. So if you wanted to make a component that was intentionally broken, it would probably give you an error.
Right. So if I were to come here and just or just to write some bad JavaScript code, which is for whatever reason harder than what I think it should be, right? Oh, nope, that did not work. Why does that work? No way that works. Well, it's funny. I always break my code except when I'm intentionally trying to break it. So I'm just going to go ahead and push forward and then we'll break it later on. All right. So now I want to make sure that this component breaks or that my application breaks. And when it does so, I want there to be a decent message that gets demonstrated to the user, letting them know, hey, we're tracking. This is an issue. It is not on you. It is on us. Please let us know so that we can address this issue. Well, inside of pages, I'm going to go ahead and create an error page. Now for this error page, we're going to follow the same exact pattern that we have before. We'll add a p tag of please reach out and inform us of your issue at 555. There you go. All right, something along these lines, nothing too crazy. And then we want to export default the error page. Well, now in the router, in order for this error page to be activated, again, it's not going to be one of the children because it's not matching any sort of URL pattern that we needed to match. Instead, it's going to be an entirely different attribute named error element. And this is the error element for the app, right? So as the path to index renders, the element of app will render. These are the children of app, which I don't need to worry about. And the error element will be my error page. All right, so now let's try to break it. Let me go ahead and just put hello is hello. That did not break it. Let's see, what can I do to break it in W6D3? All right, we'll go ahead and demonstrate count here. And we'll say that count times 3 is what's going to be demonstrated there. And then we'll go ahead and add a button that will change the value of count to an object of hello. And yes, I'm tracking. I am missing that. Hello. All right, so I get, oh, that didn't break it either. Interesting. There you go. Finally broke it. All right, so now I made a serious coding error that it entirely broke my stack, or it broke the entire application. At some point, the user is interacting with my site. All of a sudden, they run into this error. They're saying, hey, there's been an error. Please reach out and inform us of your issue at 555-555. They can still go back and interact with the site. They're just running into an error. All right. Perfect. And now we're back to our regular Bootstrap. Our project is running. Our project has children, and it has an error element. So just to break this down, let's go and take a look at our drawing and take a look at the router at the same time that we are moving through this. We created a router, and we see here that before the router, all the application did was index.html would render, main.jsx would then inject all of app.jsx inside of index.html. But now, because we have a router, main.jsx interacts with the router, and the router is what injects app into index.html and then handles which component to render under the app, otherwise known as a page. As our application renders, it starts from top to bottom, moves into the app. Well, now the app needs to be able to know about children. And if we come up here, in order for the app to know about the children or the pages that exist and run this ternary statement, figuring out what URL pattern is supposed to render what page, we have to connect an outlet. So here in app.jsx, we added an outlet on line 15. That outlet then connects the pages or the children, as we've listed them here, at index true. So meaning if URL is equal to the same thing as index, it's going to render the home page. If the URL pattern has contact, it's going to render the contact page. If the URL pattern has about, it will render the about page. It's just matching the URL pattern to the correct path that we've instructed and then rendering the element matching that path. We then covered not found pages, where not found pages would be triggered by anything else that doesn't match this pattern. Well, if we want to see that in code, what that actually translates to is just an else. So else, I want you to return not found page.jsx. And then finally, we have an error boundary. Now that error boundary does not fall within the outlet because it doesn't have anything to do with the children or the pages that we've been talking about. Instead, that falls within the app. It's saying, hey, if there's an error with app, we're going to render this error page. When it comes to the navbar, you have to utilize this link from React Router DOM when you create a navbar. That's what's going to allow you to switch between pages without getting rid of your state. You're not re-rendering your entire application. You want to make sure that the state is maintained across your application, so you have to utilize link. We utilize a React Bootstrap navbar, which we essentially just copied and pasted, where the only two attributes that we switched was we changed the href attribute to a 2, which is coming from the React Router link. And then we switched the behavior of this navbar link to act as a React Router DOM link. All right, at this point, does anyone have any questions over anything that we accomplished during this lecture?
This is gonna be a little bit meta. So React Router is just a separate library that changes the behaviors of vanilla React.
I'm so sorry, Kenny. I think you're having audio issues and I couldn't really understand you. If anybody heard him, could you please relay to me what was said? All right, movement. I like it.
Okay, I'm here now. I was gonna say,
There.
so to be clear, React Router is just an additional library that just changes the default behavior of vanilla React.
Not vanilla React, but more of the way that the DOM is behaving, the virtual DOM is behaving in switching the component that's rendering on the screen, right? Because vanilla React doesn't interact or create a virtual DOM. React creates the virtual DOM. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
My accomplishment. It's just hilarious. I can do this.
I did have that issue if now is the time to ask about that.
Once I stop the recording, we'll go ahead and open it up.
Okay.
All right. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions. Let me go ahead and stop our recording here. Oh, I do have something on the Zoom chat, actually. Could you make a separate component or file with only imports, and then you would just have to make one import statement? You would actually have to import from that file, Jack. You would just be doing the work twice. All right. Awesome. Let me go ahead and pause our recording here.